My brother's wedding reception had more than 200 guests, crystal chandeliers, and a giant 10-foot screen behind the stage. Everything looked perfect until my photo suddenly appeared on that screen. Under it were 4 words written in huge white letters: divorce, childless, family failure. The entire room burst into laughter. My brother Daniel laughed into the microphone and said, "Relax, everyone. It's just a little family joke." My father smiled proudly. My mother sipped her wine like she was watching a comedy show. And my brother looked straight at me and said, "Come on, Emily. You know we're kidding." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just picked up my phone, typed one word, start. Within seconds, the screen behind him changed. The laughter disappeared, and the truth my family had hidden for 15 years began playing in front of every guest in that ballroom. 3 weeks before that wedding, I was sitting alone in my office in Chicago finishing a late-night architecture project. It was almost midnight. My coffee had gone cold, and I was staring at blueprints when my phone lit up with an unknown number. Normally, I ignore calls that late, but something told me to answer. A soft professional voice introduced herself as Maria Alvarez, a nurse at Lakeview Senior Care Center. The moment she said that name, my chest tightened. That was the nursing home where my grandmother lived. She explained that my grandmother was scheduled for heart surgery soon and had been asking to see me. The problem was that I wasn't allowed to visit. My father had removed my name from the approved visitor list years ago. Maria hesitated for a moment before telling me something else. She said my father had agreed to let me see my grandmother again, but only if I attended my brother Daniel's wedding first. Then her voice lowered as if she didn't want anyone around her to hear. She said my grandmother wanted to warn me about something. According to her, my family was planning something at the wedding reception involving me, and she wanted me to be ready. To understand why that warning mattered, you have to go back 15 years to the night everything in my family broke. I was 18 years old and sitting at the kitchen table in the house I grew up in. My father placed a document in front of me. It was a property transfer form for 2 acres of land outside town. My grandmother had legally given that land to me when I turned 16. It had a small creek, a big oak tree, and she always said it was meant to be my future. But my father wanted it for a development project he was planning. He told me to sign the document and transfer the property to him immediately. When I refused, his expression changed from calm to cold in seconds. 3 days later, my college fund mysteriously disappeared. A week later, he stood in the front hallway and told me if I walked out the door that night, I was no longer part of the family. So I left with 1 suitcase and barely $60 in my bank account. The story my father told everyone in town was very different. According to him, I had dropped out of school and run away with a boyfriend. In a small town, people believe the richest and most powerful man, and my father was exactly that. The next few years were the hardest of my life. I slept in my car for weeks, worked 2 jobs at diners and gas stations, and finished my high school diploma through night classes. Eventually, I enrolled in community college, transferred to the University of Illinois on a scholarship, and studied architecture. I loved architecture because buildings don't lie. When you build something strong, it stands for decades. No one can rewrite its history the way people rewrite stories about other people. I graduated at 23 years old. No one from my family showed up. I took pictures alone, outside the campus building, and celebrated by ordering cheap takeout in my tiny apartment. A few years later, I got married, but the marriage didn't last. By the time I turned 30, I was divorced and starting over again. But my career was finally growing. At 33, I had become a senior architect at a respected Chicago design firm, leading major restoration projects across the city. The ironic part was that nobody in my hometown knew any of that. They still believed the version of me my father had created 15 years earlier. After the nurse's phone call, I had a choice to make. I could go to my brother's wedding and face whatever humiliation my family had planned, or I could stay away and risk never seeing my grandmother again. I thought about it all night before calling the one person who had always been honest with me, my best friend Marcus. Marcus worked in cybersecurity and had a mind that always thought 3 steps ahead. After listening to everything, he said something simple. If you're going to walk into a room where people already plan to attack you, you don't go unprepared. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus did some research and discovered that the wedding reception venue had hired a freelance company to manage the audio and projection equipment. By pure coincidence, they were looking for one more technician to help run the system. Marcus applied for the position and was hired almost immediately. That's when we created a backup plan. It wasn't revenge. It was simply the truth. I built a short presentation on my laptop showing the real story of my life. Photos from my graduation, my architecture license, images of the projects I had designed, and awards my firm had received. The title slide read, "The Truth About Emily." "Carter." Marcus loaded the presentation onto a USB drive, connected to the reception's projector system. But we made one rule. I would only use it if my family attacked first. The wedding day arrived on a bright autumn morning. The church was filled with guests dressed in expensive suits and designer dresses. I sat quietly in the last row, while my father shook hands with half the town like a politician greeting voters. My mother floated around the front of the church, complimenting decorations and greeting friends. My brother looked happy standing at the altar beside his bride. For a moment I allowed myself to believe that maybe the nurse had been wrong and that nothing embarrassing would happen after all. But the reception proved otherwise. The ballroom at the country club was packed with nearly 200 guests. Crystal chandeliers hung above round tables covered in white linen. A massive screen stood behind the stage where the speeches would happen. During dinner, my brother grabbed the microphone and announced that he had prepared a special family slideshow. The lights dimmed, and old childhood photos began appearing on the screen. At first, everything looked normal, but then the captions changed. The first one labeled me a dropout. The next called me divorced. Another one described me as childless and alone. Each new slide brought louder laughter from the guests. That was the moment I realized my family hadn't changed at all. So I quietly picked up my phone and sent Marcus the single word we had agreed on. Start. The projector flickered and the slideshow stopped. A new image appeared on the screen showing me in a graduation cap and gown standing alone outside my university building. The caption read, "No one came to my graduation, but I graduated anyway." The room instantly grew quiet. The next slide displayed my professional architecture license. The one after that showed a skyline project I had designed. With every slide, the whispers among the guests grew louder while my father's confident smile slowly disappeared. Finally, the last slide appeared showing the legal deed to the 2 acres of land my grandmother had given me years earlier, still registered in my name. Under the document were the words, "The truth only needs one moment to be seen." The silence in the ballroom felt heavier than any laughter had moments before. Then the bride's mother stood up from the front table and asked my father if the information on the screen was true. My father tried to respond, but for the first time in my life, he seemed completely unable to control the narrative. The business partnership he had been negotiating with that family for months collapsed right there in front of everyone. Reputation had always been his most valuable asset, and now the truth had cracked it in seconds. I left the ballroom quietly without saying anything to anyone. Marcus was waiting outside near the entrance and asked how it went. I looked back at the glowing windows of the reception hall and realized that for the first time in 15 years, I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt free. 3 days later, I visited my grandmother in the nursing home. She held my hand, smiled gently, and told me she had heard about what happened at the wedding. Instead of scolding me, she simply said she was proud of me for standing up for the truth. In that moment, I understood something important. Family isn't defined by the people who share your last name. Family is defined by the people who choose to stand beside you when the truth finally comes out.